When people find out what I do for a living, the first thing they ask is, who's going to win the election in November? Because for most people, well, they don't know what else to ask a public opinion pollster. They think that's all we do is talk about elections. There's another segment of the population who follow the political news and all the polling data on a day-in, day-out basis, just like some of my friends follow baseball on a day-in, day-out basis. These people are just overwhelmed with new data and new polls. And I get lots of texts saying, oh my gosh, what's happened? You know, we went from Biden +1 to Trump +1, or this demographic group is looking a little different. And my reaction almost all the time to people like that is to say, especially at this time of the year, just chill a little bit. You're looking at it the wrong way. The people who are going to decide this election, they're not tuning in right now. They're not paying attention at all. They won't tune in until after Labor Day. Now, the political group, these people who are reading about this all the time, they're not going to change their mind. In fact, about 80% of them, 80% of American voters know how they're going to vote in 2028, to say nothing of 2024, because they're either Team Red or Team Blue. They are locked in, and the world that they're talking about doesn't even exist to some of the undecided voters. So when I talk about polling and what we can learn from it, I think of it much differently than worrying about just who's going to win an election. And that's partly because I think the American people are far more important than the people who win elections. One way of looking at it might be to think of a river, perhaps the mighty Mississippi, and picture it during a storm and the rain is coming down and the wind is whipping up. Well, the daily public opinion polls are kind of like the raindrops hitting that river. And sometimes, well, you know, the raindrop might splash to the north or the south, or it might go straight up, but it doesn't have any impact on the direction the river is going. I think that's what a lot of the political folks are doing. They're really trying to read the current from the splashes. If you go a couple of feet below the river, things look so much different. First of all, you don't even know there's a storm. That's all on the surface. And the next thing you notice is the current is always moving in one direction. Things change slowly, if at all. And that's really a good way to envision the core values of American public opinion. Things like freedom of speech, one of our most valuable freedoms. It's something that Americans have embraced for generations, and despite all the rhetoric, still believe it today. In fact, most Americans, they're concerned about disinformation. They're concerned about insulting and hateful speech. But they also recognize that letting the government decide what kind of speech is acceptable is a bigger problem than freedom of speech. We see the same thing on freedom of religion. People recognize the importance of letting people have their own faith beliefs. Something else that's been with us from the very beginning, skepticism of the federal government. Today, only 22% of voters say they trust the government to do the right thing most of the time. But guess what? Half of voters say even that is too trusting of the government. These are views that have not changed all that much over time. And I think it's much more important to focus on the deeper currents of public opinion than it is to focus on the details of who might win in the next election. When I try to distill those deep currents, I come up with three terms consistently: freedom, equality, and self-governance. These are things that have defined our nation from the very beginning. Now, during my lifetime, people on the political right have typically been associated with freedom. People on the political left have been identified with equality. And it used to be that both parties recognized that the American people were supposed to be in charge, that it was a self-governing nation. We're starting to see that fall apart right now. There are some on the right who are really kind of uncomfortable with the idea of freedom. There are some on the left who are abandoning equality in favor of equity. They say, we've got to focus on the outcomes rather than the equality of opportunity. Those things are out of touch with the deeper currents of America. I think the movement that can figure out how to become the movement of freedom and equality will become our governing movement in the next couple of generations. Regardless of who wins the election this year, they're going to have to do the same thing, regardless of which party it is. They're going to have to navigate the currents of American public opinion. It is those currents, not our elected officials, not the elected politicians, who will determine the course of our nation. And that applies to Americans today and to yesterday, but also to where our nation will be a generation from now.